Now, to discuss the potential impact of the outcome of this election on European economy, we turn to Professor Iain Begg, economist at the European Institute London School of Economic and Political Science. Now, his main research work is on the political economy of European integration and EU economic governance.
Thank you so much for joining us, Professor. Before we begin, I need to have a short disclaimer. We need to issue a short disclaimer. Here in Poland, we are still restricted by the election silence period. So I need to remind you that we have to refrain from referring directly and giving information on polls, political parties, and agendas.
Just for another half an hour.
For another half an hour, and after that we can definitely have a chat of a different sort. So how can the outcome of the European parliamentary election can impact economic policy in the EU?
Well, one way it will impact economic policy is that instead of having a coherent grouping, both centre-left and centre-right, of parties which are, broadly speaking, pro-European, the likelihood is that we will see a different mix of parties, some of whom will be more hostile to the European Union. Most forecasts have been that there will be a drift towards the right, if I'm allowed to say that, despite your disclaimer. And that will mean that you'll see maybe some more pro-market stances being taken, a bit more hostility to some of the social programs at European level, and hesitation about some of the grand ambitions at European level of having things like the Green Deal.
Now, in the past couple of months, we have been discussing the Green Deal. I mean, the farmers protested in great numbers throughout Europe. Now, what will happen to the Green Deal when the new term of European Parliament arrives?
The Green Deal will continue. It's built into the European ambitions for what might loosely be called the future industrial policy of the EU. It wants to be a sustainable industrial policy, something which promotes cleaner energy use. All that is going to continue. The only question that might arise is the pace at which things change. The protests from farmers, but not just from farmers, from industrial interests as well, may see us slowing down in the move towards net zero. So instead of it happening much quicker with the deadlines as soon as 2030, they might be postponed for 3, 4, 5 years. But the broad direction, I think, will not change.
So when we talk about economy, when we talk about spending, we also need to consider a fact that there is a war going on the European continent, and obviously European member countries are focusing on spending and putting more money, more GDP into defense. Do you think that the new European Parliament is going to push for a higher defense spending?
Well, the European Parliament has no say on defence spending, so it doesn't really matter what the European Parliament's composition is or what it says, because defence spending is a national competence. There's just a possibility that the European level might push in the direction of having things like common procurement of defence capabilities, but the idea that the EU level itself will spend on defence is fantasy.
Now, taking into account huge challenges ahead of the new European Parliament, we have US and China subsidies, unfinished single market, demography even. Now, do you think that the new European Parliament is going to push for solutions?
Well, I think we need to look at this in the context of what the different institutions in the EU do. The European Parliament is the voice of the people in one respect. It's the co-legislator with the Council of Ministers. It can talk about wanting things to be done, but its power to achieve these things is limited because it does not possess the power of initiative, which is with the European Commission, nor is it able to bring together significant amounts of money to assist in making policies happen. So, although the European Parliament may have certain preferences and they may shift in a certain direction as a result of this election, most noticeably bringing in more right of centre parties, I don't think it's going materially to alter the sorts of policies which are conducted at European level, which are more a combination of the European Commission and the Council of Ministers and the European Council.
But let me follow up on that. So do you think they can push legislatures? Do you think they can push for new legislation to actually fix the problems that people issues that people have in their countries, and that's why they voted for these members of the parliament.
Well, the European Parliament is in a curious position because in some countries the motivation to vote is very much based on national politics. In other countries, there's an element of Europeanization creeping into the priorities that voters look for. But because the European Parliament isn't able to initiate new policies, only to advocate them in its deliberations and debates, it does not have a powerful role in setting the political agenda as would happen in a national administration alongside a national parliament. Plus, the budgetary question means that they are very limited in the capabilities they have financially to fund new policies.
Some MPs seem to complain about the red tape in the EU. Do you think that the new European structures will be able to tackle that issue?
Well, there's a paradox here because everybody says there should be more simplification. I have never heard a parliamentarian, a candidate, a European commissioner argue for complexification. And yet things get more complicated all the time. So the paradox at the heart of this is that people want to regulate for perfectly respectable reasons. And by regulating, you get more complex procedures with the red tape you're referring to. Yes, there's always a push to reduce red tape, but the paradox I'm referring to is that very little tends to get done to cut red tape.
Now, also, this Parliament, European Parliament plays a huge role when it comes to creation of EU budget. Where do you think this new money is going to go in the new term of the European Parliament?
Well, let me first be clear that the European Parliament is what's known as one half of the budgetary authority along with the Council of Ministers. There's going to be a new multi-annual financial framework starting from 2028, but the first stages of negotiating that will come with a Commission paper sometime in the next 12 months. The European Parliament will then make representations, the Member States will make representations, and it will all be under intense negotiation for the best part of 2 years before an agreement is reached. But one thing the European Parliament does not have is the power to raise revenue. That comes from the Member States. So it's an odd Parliament in being able to influence expenditure but not revenue, and the consequence of this very often is the European Parliament wants to spend more because it doesn't have to raise the money, and it's the Member States through the Council of Ministers who tend to resist it. This is a very unusual conjunction. You think what happens in any individual country or in the United States where the revenue and expenditure go together. The European Parliament cannot do the revenue side.
So if we were to actually address one issue, one main challenge when it comes, one main issue that actually stands ahead of the new European structures, what would you say in terms of economy? What would it be?
Well, the indirect channel in which the European Parliament will, in the first instance, affect the economy is through the appointment of the European Commission President and the approval of the various other European commissioners. They have to be approved by the Parliament by half the votes, which is 360 plus 1. The lead candidate at the moment is going to be Ursula von der Leyen to go for a second term. But if she fails, then the European Parliament have a significant influence in choosing the second choice. That's where it's going to help to shape what the policies are, both economic and political, but certainly economic, of the new Commission. And that's where its strongest influence will arise in the short term.
Thank you so much. Professor Iain Begg, economist at the European Institute, London School of Economics and Political Sciences. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.